Kadish. I'm Judy Friedman Kadish, Director of Americans for a Safe Israel, also known as AFSI. We work to educate the public about the real Israel, the one the mainstream media hides, and give you our beliefs about what will make Israel a strong, safe, Jewish state. One of the many ways we do this is our twice-yearly life-changing chizuk missions to Israel. We go to bring strength to those who are experiencing conflict, but find that we get so much more in return. The next one begins on May 15th and will be extraordinary. If you will not be joining us, please follow our trip on our twice-weekly emails. So, today's program. Israel has long relied on diaspora Jews and the US for diverse kinds of support. Sadly, under some of the recent administrations, we see that eroding a bit, sometimes a lot. The progressive governments are not as friendly to Israel as some have been, and that distance is making it even more acceptable to let anti-Semitism, sometimes disguised as anti-Zionism, to rear its ugly head in so many places, beginning in the schools, but not ending there. Today, we're honored to have as our guest, Lowenthal Marcus, who is, among other things, legal director of the Deborah Project. She's an experienced litigator who also worked for 10 years as a journalist, focused on Middle East conflict, as well as on anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism in America. Her articles, op-eds, and columns have appeared in national and international media, including the Wall Street Journal, the Weekly Standard, the Jerusalem Post, and many others. As founder of Z Street, an educational nonprofit devoted to educating the public about the Middle East and about the response of democratic nations to terror, Lori successfully sued the Internal Revenue Service for viewpoint discrimination after learning that the IRS delayed Z Street's application for tax-exempt status because the positions it took regarding Israel were at odds with those of the Obama administration. Mrs. Marcus is a graduate of Brandeis University, has 2 master's degrees from Bryn Mawr College, and received her JD from Harvard Law School. The Deborah Project, where she's legal director, was founded by Harvard Law School professor Jesse Fried and is staffed by experienced volunteer and staff attorneys. It provides legal assistance on a pro bono basis to those being discriminated against in educational settings, either because they are Jewish and/or pro-Israel. The aim of the Deborah Project is to use legal skills and tools to uncover, publicize, and dismantle anti-Semitic abuses in educational systems with the aim of bringing wrongdoers to justice and deterring future abuse to those being discriminated against in educational settings, either because they are Jewish and/or pro-Israel. It is with great admiration and extreme anticipation that I give you Lowenthal Marcus. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. First, let me say that I respected and revered your mother, Helen Friedman, very much. Zichrona livracha. What a great model.
Yep, for all of us.
So the Deborah Project was developed to deal with discrimination in educational settings, discrimination against Jews and Zionists. And it's a complicated area because for so many reasons. For one reason, there are lots of different laws, some of which are anti-discrimination laws, but don't apply to religion. Are Jews an ethnic group? Is national origin discrimination the way to attack what we see as Jew hatred and mistreatment of Jews? And over time, let me say, our first case was representing the American Studies Association. That's an association of academic leaders in the field of American studies. The association was taken over by anti-Israel activists in order solely to pass a BDS resolution, boycott, divestment, sanctions resolution, which they did. The Deborah Project, along at the time with the Brandeis Center, brought a legal claim, and the claim was really based on corporate law, which is not something most people think about in terms of a tool for fighting anti-Jewish discrimination. That has been up and down in the courts. It started in in federal court in Washington, D.C., and then it was kicked down to state court, and then it went back and forth. It's been going on for 7 years now and still not resolved. However, bringing the lawsuit itself was a great deterrent for a long time in preventing other academic associations from moving forward with BDS resolutions. So sometimes, and only when you have a legitimate legal claim, sometimes just the filing of a lawsuit can really deter bad action. And I'm emphasizing that because it's really important that more people who see discrimination against Jews realize that there are ways to address this. Most organizations that work in this area are pro bono, which means it doesn't cost the litigants anything. And it's really important that we start standing up and speaking out. The next case, the one that I worked on first, was a case by a student, a university student, 2 weeks into his freshman year at we'll call a local liberal arts small college on the main line in Pennsylvania. This student was skinny, not very big, really smart. He took his gap year, not to go to Israel, although he's a great Zionist, but to learn Krav Maga. So he was confident. And he was very knowledgeable about what was happening in Israel. He was in the bathroom early one morning when another student, a much larger student we'll call Sean, started talking to Michael, my client, and said, "You're just a Zionist bitch, and Israel doesn't deserve to exist." And Michael was very unhappy and said, "Don't say that. If you want to have a discussion about the Iron Dome bill that passed today, let's have a discussion." It's your perfect Jewish kid, knowledgeable, articulate, brainy, and this other kid was none of those things. And so he ultimately resorted to violence, pushed our guy to the ground. Our guy said, "Don't do that. I'm going to knock you out," which seemed ridiculous because Sean is an athlete and had like 50 pounds on Michael. However, Sean pushed Michael again. Michael punched him in the face. Quietly, I cheered. And although I didn't know him at the time when I heard the story, but unfortunately knocked out 2 of Sean's teeth. What happens? Now let's take this apart. Imagine it wasn't a Jewish Zionist kid. Imagine it was any other ethnic group, and someone starts pushing and using ethnic slurs. What do you think would happen? Not what happened in Michael's case. Michael, within 2 days, was sent off campus, barred from the campus, had a kangaroo trial, and was expelled. Michael's claims against Sean were ignored. When at this point, I was brought in and was dealing with the outside counsel for the college, when I said, do you understand under your own college rules, under your policy book, what Sean did was a racist slur and a hate crime. The outside counsel from a major law firm laughed at the idea that mistreating a Jew, a Zionist, would constitute a hate crime. So that's it. The case ended up very well, despite this lawyer starting out laughing at my position. And Michael had the black mark removed from his file. He would never have gotten into another college if it said that he was suspended or expelled for fighting. He went to another college. He's doing great. He got back his parents got back most of his tuition, room and board. This is another example of a situation where people would say, oh, forget it. It's never gonna, just leave and start over or try and start over. I'm telling this story to you because, well, both because I love the story and I love this kid. I'm so proud of him. But he had the nerve, he had the guts, the chutzpah to say, I'm not going to take this. What they did to me was wrong. And it wasn't just Sean, it was the college. They had a ridiculous series of violations of his, forget about due process, the process created by the college. The universities around the country have their own internal policies. And they're usually, as you can imagine, not very consistent with due process, but even according to their own policies, they violated them. And because he was so spunky and absolutely prepared to go to the mat, and because we supported him wholeheartedly and did not back down, there was a very good ending for this college student. We also have cases against school boards. For some reason, we have several in New Jersey where you have, in both cases, school board members who are anti-Israel and proud of it and think it's a positive, and probably is a reason why they're on the school board. But in one instance, we had a parent at the school who was present at the school board meeting and heard two school board members at the end of the meeting stand up and start talking about how outrageous Israel is and, bombing Gaza and Israel is the terrorist state, really extreme statements. And this is two school board members at the end of a school board meeting. So we were brought in actually by ZOA to file an amicus brief in that case because the School Ethics Commission said, oh, there was no violation. That case is pending. And now we have another recent one of a school board member in Westfield, New Jersey, who is the vice president of the school board. And she has been retweeting really nasty, pornographic, anti-Israel tweets. And we learned signed a document, which hundreds of professors all over the world have signed, committing themselves to bringing in and supporting BDS in the educational institutions in which they work, and to ensure that the Palestinian narrative is heard always and from the Palestinians themselves, not from anyone else. So that's a case that we have pending right now before the New Jersey School Ethics Commission. That's kind of a roundup of most of the cases that we're working on, but the big one that we have is in California, and it deals with ethnic studies. Ethnic studies, for those of you who don't know, is, well, what I thought it was learning about different ethnic groups in whatever community your school is in. And that made sense to me. And I think it makes sense to most people, why wouldn't you want to learn about the background culture of others in your community? However, that is not what ethnic studies, at least as recognized in California, is. In California, and believe me when I tell you, California is where it starts, it is not where it ends. This horror that I will describe is spreading throughout the country and is coming to a state near you, school districts near you. And what ethnic studies is considered to be by people who consider themselves to be and hold themselves out to be ethnic studies experts is the study of 4 different ethnic groups, only 4: Black Americans, Hispanic, Latino Americans, Native Americans, and Asian American Pacific Islanders. That's 4 groups, and they say, the so-called experts, they don't want to hear about any other groups. Those are not authentic ethnic studies subjects, just those 4 groups. However, in just those 4 groups, somehow there is an entire curriculum based on Palestine/Israel. And it is, as you can imagine, the narrative is all about Israel is a European settler colonialist state created by genocide, land grabs, and ethnic cleansing, that Israel is an apartheid state. And they liken the Arab Palestinians to Native Americans, the indigenous people in America, and to dispossessed people. Essentially, they call them Black and brown bodies, everyone who fits in those groups. And so people who are taught, and they are taught that they are victims of America's white European settler colonialists, and they believe it, they're taught this. These classes start in pre-kindergarten. They believe that with as much hatred as they learn about America, they learn to also hate, despise, and blame Jews and the Jewish state. Now, it just boggles the mind on so many different levels because it has nothing to do with the original 4 groups. The Arab Palestinians are allegedly oppressed in another part of the world, not in America. Ethnic studies is supposed to deal with the discrimination, even in this iteration, discrimination in America and throughout educational policy, which is claimed to be, and actually, I would argue in many instances is Eurocentric. It's true, but add positives, don't just add negatives. And that's what we have found. It's ammunition for and a platform for learning to hate the others rather than sharing your own with the others. So we brought a lawsuit in California. It was the first one in the country, first lawsuit in the country to attack this version of ethnic studies. The reason is one of the many reasons why it's so important is because California passed a law which requires, in order to graduate from high school, every California public school student has to have at least 1 course in ethnic studies. So if you believe that the universities now are dangerous for Jews, for Zionists, just wait until the generations of students who have been marinated in this hatred towards America and towards Jews and the Jewish state, wait until they get to college and beyond. I mean, it is not going to disappear. Things are going to get increasingly worse. It's a very, very important case. It's very complicated because Title VI of the Civil Rights Act covers discrimination in education, but Title VI doesn't include as a protected class religion. And we are trying hard to include Jews in the category of national origin. And in our case, in particular, in this Los Angeles case, we are trying to make everyone understand that although not every Jew calls him or herself a Zionist, Zionism is a foundational platform, a foundational belief of Judaism. And what these ethnic studies, these liberated, that's what they call themselves, liberated ethnic studies or critical ethnic studies, what they say is, oh, don't worry about criticizing Israel because that's not anti-Semitic. Zionism and Judaism are distinct. It is not anti-Semitic, to be honest, they say, to criticize Israel. So we're dealing with a lot of different mindsets that have to be changed, including people who aren't necessarily haters of Jews in the Jewish state. They just don't think about Jews having the same civil rights, the protection from abuse and discrimination as others in America. And in fact, it's hard to convince Jews of that as well. I would say, although we have a very difficult legal road and we are prepared to fight and keep fighting this fight for as long as it takes, it's difficult to get people to agree to be plaintiffs. Now, in the California case, we looked for teachers in the schools who believe in Zionism, and we also looked for parents of students. And it was really, California is huge. It was really hard to find people who were willing to be plaintiffs in that case. And even the ones we did find who were brave, they refused to be named. So that's yet another level of difficulty. They're preceded as, you're all familiar with, Jane Roe or John Doe. So that's how we've labeled them, but that's being challenged as well. So there are lots of different available tools for creative litigators and litigators who are not concerned with pushing the legal boundaries. And look, the NAACP certainly did that. The civil rights movement was all about asserting rights that hadn't been recognized before. And that's what the Deborah Project, we believe we're doing the same thing. Unfortunately, we have a bigger job in terms of convincing our own that they are entitled to these legal protections. But I truly believe that unless people are prepared to use the court system, which for the most part has not yet been corrupted by progressivism, we're not going to make progress. We're going to lose ground. And so I encourage everybody to find lawyers, contact the Deborah Project or some other group that you know who represents groups who have been discriminated against or individuals discriminated against because they're Jewish or pro-Israel. I also encourage, ask the questions, is there a case? Sometimes there isn't. Just as an aside, we had another person approach us and said that in Newark, the Newark School District, they're requiring all fifth graders to read a book called A Little Piece of Ground. And it's a fictional story about an adorable, sweet, appealing Palestinian boy whose family is devastated by all the closures and the apartheid in Israel. And that's required reading. And it's hard to say that fits a legal category that we can contest. So what we did was we started looking for, okay, let's find balance. If you're going to require that, then you have to require what? something positive and appealing and truthful about Jews in Israel, you don't find it. We have not been able to find a single book that fits that bill. So if any of you are writers or you know any, please, I encourage you. We have feelers out all over this country and in Israel. But so, we're not giving up, but we sometimes really need to be creative. I also really encourage people, if you can, to look at your school boards, look at the agenda, start showing up. We have lost the head start in that area. The school boards are populated by people who think we are white oppressors. And they're the ones who make ultimate decisions, the school board members. So, and if they hear from people who are not prepared to allow fiction, odious fiction, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic fiction to poison the minds of school children, that it will be good if we have people on the other side saying, no, that's not acceptable, and get up time after time and speak out and run for school boards. I can't encourage people enough. That's another really important battleground. And tell everybody everyone on this Zoom, tell everyone encourage them to go to the school board meetings and become a member if possible. But even if that's not possible for whatever reason, go and be heard. You're entitled, that's your right as a citizen. So I think that's where I'll end this very brief overview of the kind of work we do. I hope I've been clear that we are really fighting day in and day out to stop the progression of hatred against Jews in educational settings. That's our own tiny little niche. And I welcome any questions that people have. Judy or Helene, if you want to share any. I see someone says we Jews are too nice. I see that's a comment.
That is a comment. We're not actually taking raised hands just yet, but what we're doing, I just wanted to ask you, it seems that you're encouraging people to go to their school board meetings, and we know that all politics is local. Yet it's very hard to get any kind of traction and media coverage of local school board meetings that will, affect a large group of people. Is that really the way it has to go from the school board meetings to the state education board to the state court to
if the school boards start hearing from people who won't accept this kind of inappropriate education for their children, that alone is a deterrent, and keep showing up. And it's hard to speak in public. I don't have that problem, but most people do. Go with friends, show up and share, send out a newsletter, or just put on your Facebook page what you heard at the school board meeting. There's a way to create some critical mass. And yes, it will make a difference. It does. And if there's a problem later, you can look back and say, this was raised and the school board did nothing. That matters. Then you'll get the media to pay attention. Yes, they're probably not going to unless something outrageous is on the agenda. And develop relationships with the very, very low level, I shouldn't say low level, local media outlets. It's important.
Does the Deborah Project have any kind of listing of school districts that are particularly at risk of passing this kind of thing, or should we just assume that they're all doing this kind of thing?
Well, we don't have a listing, although we can put on our website, and we will. Judy, thank you. I'll put a little hat tip to Judy. That we know where it's begun to infiltrate, in which states. Doesn't mean we know everything. We certainly don't. And by this, I'm talking about the anti-Semitic stuff. The ethnic studies and the woke and the progressive, oh my God, it's everywhere. It is everywhere. I mean, there's something called queer kindergarten. Queer kindergarten, it's not anything about Judaism, but anti-Semitism, but it's a large contract was awarded in California to a group that is about queer kindergarten. You know, that got through. That's public money, which reminds me of another point I really wanted to make. And I think Bob, if he's on, will recognize this, but it's, we have filed dozens and dozens of the California equivalent of FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. Every state, I think every state, just about every state has their own version of it. And what it does is entitle, well, everybody, sometimes it's by citizen of a particular area, you have to check your own state laws. But for example, in California, we filed dozens of requests. And what we're asking is, how is the public money being spent? We, Americans, are entitled to that information. They have to answer. And what happens if they don't? That's where it gets a little harder for regular citizens. If a school district doesn't answer your requests or answers inadequately, the next level is to bring it to court. And that's what the Deborah Project is doing. You will soon hear about many cases filed against school districts for failing to fulfill their legal obligations to answer how the public money is being spent on those kinds of contracts. Their contracts have been signed with something called the Liberated Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum Consortium. And they're the ones who have, or one of the ones who have this Teach Palestine curriculum.
Yes.
And they have, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry. In getting ready for this, for today, I took a deep look at your website, and I saw that there is a national consortium that is being contracted by various school districts to teach the teachers how to do this, and not only teach the teachers how to do this, but to teach them how to close their doors and not let anybody see that they're doing this. So it's just so insidious, and it's just so, and is there any way of bringing this national consortium to, I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate this. There are many really good questions, but I just wanted to bring up that national consortium thing because it's horrifying.
It is horrifying. And we did bring our case in California against the one in California, but there's one in Washington, and there's, as you rightly state, there's a national one now. We need to find, that's where you have to get creative in your legal theories. We sued the consortium. We sued two of the leadership of the consortium, one of whom is a public school teacher in Los Angeles. We sued the teachers union, which is pushing this kind of education hard. That's a big problem. Unions are difficult to sue. You have to be really creative. And we only named the school district as a nominal defendant because they had not signed an official contract. But once you get into discovery, that's a later stage of litigation. If you can survive the initial motions to dismiss, then you find out all kinds of interesting information. And that's what we're hoping to be able to do, whether it's in this first California case or one of the many others we will be bringing.
Okay, so I must ask some questions from the audience. Alice Bressman wants to know how to prevent state legislatures from passing ethnic studies curriculums.
Treat it like the school board, the way I described what you should do at the school board. You have got to let legislators know there is strong opposition, and you should know that the original California ethnic studies law had an original model curriculum which contained this horrible anti-Israel stuff. And there were so many letters sent in and such an outcry that the governor vetoed the act because of the model curriculum. And they had to institute a new model curriculum. Now, the people who had written the first model curriculum, it's just as it sounds, it's a model, it's not a requirement. Those original drafters, they created their own consortium. They call themselves experts. Many of them actually do have degrees in ethnic studies, but it's all ethnic studies. This version of ethnic studies grew out of the Third World Liberation Front and the Black Panther movement in the 1960s, which were rioting and striking at universities in California. And the way the government ultimately got the strikes to stop was by agreeing to start an ethnic studies department at San Francisco State University, which is one place where it is now. There are several of them now, but it's all, that's what it comes from. I mean, when you say critical race theory and the people in the Liberated Consortium, they say, yes, liberated ethnic studies is based on critical race theory. It is an anti-racist effort. And by anti-racist, they have coined all the best words. What they really mean is it's not your kind of racist, it's my kind of racist, which means hate everybody who was in a position of, they say, privilege, authority, whatever from before. So it's a flip. And Ibrahim Kendi, who's written like the book on critical race theory, he said the only way to stop past discrimination is to discriminate now. And the only way to stop future discrimination is to keep discriminating into the future. I mean, they're very upfront about it. So that really got me going. But you need to let the legislators know that there's a problem, and then you need to hold their feet to the fire. That's what happened in California. They were able to achieve the first part, as did numbers of mainstream Jewish organizations. And then they celebrated, and then they stopped watching. And then it was hard to admit that they were crowing earlier, and what they hoped to prevent was happening again in another way. And they didn't have the energy or didn't want to admit that they hadn't been completely victorious. And that's the situation we're in now.
Martha Cohn asks, can you explain in more detail why Title VI does not apply in the California ethnic studies case?
Well, we did file a Title VI claim, but it's very hard to make because Title VI does not include as a protected class religion. And we are representing Jewish Zionists. So we did have some Israeli plaintiffs or Israeli Americans, so we could claim national origin, and that is covered by Title VI. And we also have some Persian American Jews. And so we can claim they are covered by national origin. But we went through as soon as our new website is launched, we'll have the complaint, which goes through a long list of how it is that we claim with not just a straight face, but with complete conviction that Zionism, actual Zionism, not the dirty word that's being used, Zionism is a foundational basis of Judaism. And so we say it's a sincerely held religious belief, and therefore it falls under the First Amendment. We have a First Amendment claim in there as well. As I said, we're trying to be as creative as possible. Now, the current, believe it or not, the current Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, has recently issued 2 letters, which are very, very helpful, although a little bit vaguer than I'd like. But they have described anti-Zionist acts against Jews, both in Berkeley and at the University of Vermont. The Office of Civil Rights described those acts specifically as anti-Semitic. So that's a great foothold. Doesn't help with Title VI, but it does help with state discrimination laws. We're still national origin. We're trying, when I say we, us, and other legal entities are trying to include ethnicity, Jews as an ethnic group, because ethnicity is covered by Title VI. So there's a very complicated answer, I'm afraid, but if you want to follow up, you can reach me through the Deborah Project. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Oh, yeah. And I had thought that Jews were a protected class, that Trump had done something to make Jews a protected class under Title VI. I guess that has just, the baby in the bathwater went away. We have a very interesting question. It's quite long, but basically the gist is that Stacy Gittleman is a reporter in the Detroit metro area, and she's been covering an incident at Bloomfield Hills High School where it is being investigated who is responsible for allowing Hawalda Araf for speaking to hundreds of high school students at mandatory assemblies, telling them that Israel is, all the horrible things, genocide, apartheid, Islam, and now Muslim students are crying Islamophobia. What can be done with the misinformation? I can't read all the whole question. It's very
okay. Stacy, contact me off afterwards. You can get my email address from Judy. There's a difference. As I said, dealing with anti-Semitism in the educational settings is very complicated, and one reason why it's so important and better to start addressing it at public school, elementary, and secondary school is because teachers in public school, those public schools, not college level, do not have a First Amendment right in the classroom. They cannot express their own opinion. They are being paid with public dollars, and they cannot say many of the things that they can get away with at the university level, which is not a direct answer to Stacy's question. Now I'll get to that. But it's such an important point. I wanted to share it as I was reminded. Is it true, Stacy, that why are they claiming Islamophobia? Because people have been complaining about this person speaking?
Yes, I'm trying to unmute you, Stacy.
You probably have to unmute.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so after this incident, Hawaii Araf was a failed candidate for Congress in Michigan. And she was invited to be on a panel to talk about discrimination that they have faced in high school. This was at a high school. And so what happened, I could send you my articles in the chat, was that this caused divisiveness amongst students, Jewish students who were at these mandatory assemblies. Right away, they were triggered. They felt like that she was talking falsely about Israel. But what happened then was that Muslim students said that they were being discriminated against by their teachers. The school in 1 week had 17 incidents of hate crime complaints. The superintendent just recently, as today, resigned. It's just caused a lot of divisiveness in the school district. And this was a student-led diversity day program where all the other panelists stuck to their topic of like what it was felt to be discriminated against, either because you're Black, gay, trans, Latino. And Huwaida, who was invited and wasn't properly vetted, instead talked about how she went to Palestine and she saw a systemic apartheid and the blockade in Gaza, and so basically then the Muslim families, there's a large Muslim population here. Hawaii Araf is actually a Palestinian Christian. They said that there was a blowback against Muslim kids.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's fresh. It's not even like a month old that this is going on.
okay. Well, contact me or I'll get your contact
Yeah.
information. But right, it's coming down to the high school level, and it takes a lot of finesse by administrators to deal with something like that. Obviously, she should have been cut off once she went off, the path, and her talking points. But it's very hard, and it's probably why the wiser thing is for schools not to have this kind of assembly, but they're going to. People are going to be asked, and if you exclude certain groups, then you are discriminating against them. It's very complicated and totally inappropriate, in my opinion. It's not a legal opinion for high school students. It's hard for. Remember when a judge, a Court of Appeals judge, just tried to speak at Stanford Law School, and it was the behavior was unbelievable. So it's a wholly complex area, and it's difficult for administrators to deal with. They're going to have to start having some guidelines. And my guess is that the national teachers unions will get out there first and create rules that most people on this call won't be comfortable with. So again, we need to mobilize better. We stink at it so far. People on the other side are much better. And as a result, we're suffering and our children are suffering.
Oh, thank you. I have questions from 3 different people that kind of all go together: Mark Karoff, Richard Galber, and Jeff Dalby. So Mark wants to know, do you find that the emphasis on progressivism by major Jewish organizations inhibit your work in getting American Jews to fight anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Richard Galber wants to know, how does ADL teacher training at and for schools complicate the situation and potentially make the situation worse? And Jeff says, after telling a friend here in Jerusalem about the Deborah Project, she asked me to ask you if you've ever reached out to a mainstream Jewish organization like ADL or AJC for assistance, if for no other reason than to get them on record as not willing to be helpful. If you haven't, would you consider it?
Well, I answered the first one, which was yes. It's a problem. Look, I've always been lucky / unlucky enough to be affiliated with the outsider rabble-rousing group like AFSI, and those of us who are very comfortable in our role as not having to be in the room Jews. And by that, I mean make nice to political leadership or the moneyed classes who, are that definition of conservative. They don't want to rock the boat. It is a problem. We had the organizations that were mentioned specifically push back hard against us for even bringing the case in California. We actually had a Jewish legislator who became threatening because we didn't accede to his request not to do this. Did I mention it was a Jewish legislator? Yeah.
Yes, you did.
Yes, I know.
I'll guess who it might be, but
No, don't guess. So pretend I don't know. So yeah, it is a problem, and it's much harder to move a large entity. It's very difficult. I don't want to trash other groups other than to say at a very general level, it's easier to be lean and mean. And you're beholden to far fewer. We don't have a long list of donors who need to be satisfied. And you know all the reasons why they're not helpful, but they are ubiquitous. And so if there's no one else around, everybody automatically thinks, oh, we'll contact the ADL. The ADL comes in and gives a seminar, and that's the end of the problem. But it isn't often the end of the problem. In fact, sometimes the problem has become worse. So did I answer also? Yes, I did with the third as well. We did reach out and we were rebuffed.
and as expected. Helene Abramson, who I want to thank again for always being so helpful, and especially today for suggesting that we bring you on and contacting you, had a really excellent question. Would you like to ask it?
Lori, actually, it's pretty simple. Most of us are past the point in our lives where we have children in school. Even if we sat through the school board, a lot of times the curriculum is so not specific that unless you have a child in a classroom, you might not know that required reading was the Palestinian pathetic kid, or at high school level, there's some really scary stuff. But unless you have a kid there, it's very hard to find that out. So my question is, how do we find it out? And do we have standing to ask if we do not have children in school?
If you're a taxpayer, you do, right? You're paying for the school and the teacher's salaries. So yes, you do. How do you find out what matters? While I was sitting here and we're all talking, I was thinking, why isn't Facebook used more? I think local Facebook groups probably could be very helpful in terms of letting people find each other and then share information, even divide up. Okay, you focus on this issue and share what you learn, and I'll focus on this issue. Or I know that a parent was upset about X, but can't go to the school board meeting. Those of us who no longer have children at home sometimes have more time at night to go to a meeting. Do it virtually first, create alliances, share information, get a hold of people, and there are always a few who are happy to speak out in public, aren't concerned. we have to do it, because if we don't, our children will suffer, and we are starting to suffer. And we all know where we are now in the world, and it's not good. So don't say I'm too tired or I don't know the issues. Contact people who do know. Hello. Afsy knows, Lori knows, Helene knows. There are a lot of us. Ken knows. I see Ken there. He knows. There are a lot of people with information who can be helpful.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I just want to thank you again for being so open to answering so many of our questions, and sometimes they do repeat themselves. It's just a question, I think, of our frustration at this growing progressivism in our society, and there also there's kind of even a breakdown. You suggested Facebook. Well, no one under like 30 uses Facebook anymore. I mean,
Right, I'm talking to us.
certainly we
do.
can use it amongst ourselves, but to hear what's going on amongst the kids, you've
Mhm.
got to go elsewhere, because they're not on Facebook anymore. They've moved on to Instagram, right? Or
Right,
TikTok.
which I don't think is a forum that can work for this. I don't know. it. Don't
Well,
use it too much.
It's it's on my list of to-dos, learn how to Instagram, but maybe one of these days. So
Well, I do know that there are teachers on Facebook, in Facebook groups. So find a friendly face. Promise not to share their names, and find parents, go to the play. I don't know how to give everyone perfect advice at all, but I do know that all of us trying can achieve a lot more than none of us trying.
And another thing I saw on your website that I found very encouraging was you're open to new pro bono attorneys, and B, you got some kind of wonderful grant that is going to allow you to hire more attorneys. So you will be able to cover more of these issues for more of the states that are coming up. And so I want to congratulate you for that, and just wish your organization all the best, because we need you. You're absolutely vital. And it is scary to think what will happen when children start learning in pre-K to hate us, and then they start teaching pre-K themselves, or kindergarten, or 7th grade. It's just it's a very scary kind of thing. So we're going to say goodbye. However, Lori has agreed to stay on and answer